Hi, and welcome to my channel, My Reading Life. This is my first ever booktube video, and I thought today I would just do a quick weekend reads. Since I missed Friday and it's now Saturday, I thought I would just take this chance to show you what I'm planning to read this weekend. Starting with this, Stephen King, The Gunslinger, book 1 in the Dark Tower series. This is a fantasy novel, and it's a little bit weird, but Stephen King is my favorite author, has been since I was a teenager, and I did try to read this book, actually, when I was a teenager, and just could not get into it. It was just too weird for me, and I never could connect with the character, and I didn't really understand what was going on with it or anything like that. So I put it to the side, even though I do collect Stephen King, and I have the whole series of The Dark Tower. And then I read or saw somewhere that Stephen King had rewritten this book or had edited this book when he finished the entire Dark Tower trilogy, because he wrote this book as quite a young man and only finished the series in the early 2000s. And I think this rewrite came out in 2002 or 2003. So I figured I'd give it another shot, especially since there's a movie coming sometime. And I'm actually really loving it. It's really it's Stephen King's signature style. The characters are interesting and make you care about them. You can tell from this book that it was written when he was younger. It's a lot more his his first books. It's in the style of that, and he seemed to be really fascinated with sex and really gross stuff back in those days. Not so bad in his more recent novels, but it's a great dark fantasy. It's a little bit of a mashup between epic fantasy and westerns. So enjoying this, and I am quite far along. I only have about 75 more pages left to go in this. So hoping to finish that today, actually. The other book that I'm reading is a nonfiction, The Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee. And this is a biography of cancer, and it's a tome. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's like 500 pages. Yeah, it's close to 500 pages, and I'm only on like page 160 or something like that. And so I will not be finishing this weekend, but I do want to dip into it some more and get a little bit further along in it, because it is very interesting. The author does a really great job of engaging you in something that you wouldn't think would be particularly interesting. Cancer is not a fun topic, but the history of it and how we came to understand the disease is quite fascinating. This goes way back in time to the original, like even Roman and that far back times, Roman Empire times, where they didn't really know what it was, but they understood that these tumors were what was causing people's illnesses and things like that. And I'm up to, in the narrative, about the 1950s and 60s, when chemotherapy was first being used. I think that's the time period that we're in. Yeah, 50s and 60s. And so getting a little bit of the first cases where they used chemotherapy successfully, which is really, really interesting, and how they came to understand how chemotherapy works. Really cool. Another thing that I found really interesting in this is some of the case studies that are used to illustrate his points were patients from Maine, which I find really awesome because I'm from Maine, so it's always neat to read about things that happen in Maine or people from Maine. And a lot of the original research took place at the now famous Dana-Farber Medical Center in Boston. So of course people from Maine would get sent to Boston when they had really serious illnesses, and even still happens today. People end up getting sent to Boston for really terrible cancer problems. So that's pretty fascinating. I'm really enjoying it. And I typically do have one fiction and one nonfiction book on the go at all times. I like to switch back and forth. I usually have multiple books on the go at all times, but definitely one fiction and at least one nonfiction, and I usually have an audiobook on the go as well. But I finished my audiobook yesterday and I haven't picked out a new one. I finished a re-listen of The Duke and I by Julia Quinn, a romance novel that I really enjoy. So I'll be picking a new audiobook this weekend as well. Then the next book that I plan to start once I've finished the Stephen King Gunslinger is this one, Ship of Destiny, which is the third book in the Live Ship Traders by Robin Hobb, an epic fantasy series that I am really loving. I'm enjoying it better than the first trilogy in this sort of world that Robin Hobb has created. And this book I can't talk about too much, obviously, since it's the third book in the series, but is, like I said, a fantasy series where there's sentient figureheads on ships, and these sentient figureheads are passed down in families, and through the series you learn how they become sentient and the whole history behind them and what's actually going on. And there's multiple characters, and the story is told through alternating points of view narrative from each of the characters, and I really like that style of writing for fantasy novels, or pretty much any kind of novels. I really think it moves the story along, and I just really enjoy that type of a story. And the other thing that I really love about this series is there's really excellent lady characters, some kick-ass female characters who don't wait around to be rescued. They're gonna do their own rescuing, and I really like an awesome, strong female character in any of my books, but especially my fantasy, and they're few and far between. So I highly recommend all of Robin Hobb's work, as much of BookTube does. I've heard her mentioned quite a few times on different channels that I follow, and I know she's a favorite on BookTube, and I'm definitely on that bandwagon as well. So that's my weekend in reading planned, and I hope that you all have time to read this weekend as well, and I will talk to you soon.